If you've ever caught yourself thinking, my team should just know what to do, or why can't my team read my mind? This episode is for you. The truth is, unspoken expectations lead to missed deadlines, miscommunication, and frustration on all sides. But there's a better way to make your expectations so crystal clear that your team knows exactly what needs to be done without the guesswork. Today, I'm joined by Kendra Johnson, Leadership Development Specialist and founder of the Venned Group, to noodle on one of my favorite topics, communication and leadership. We're going to break down why unclear expectations will hold your team back and how to fix it. If you want to spend less time micromanaging and more time seeing your team thrive, you won't want to miss this conversation. Let's get into it. Welcome to the Small But Mighty Agency podcast. If you want to grow an agency to 7 figures and beyond without working more hours in your business, you're in the right place. I'm your host, Audrey Joy Kwan. I know what it takes to build an agency, including supporting an agency owner in selling and exiting. I also have a master's degree in communications, specializing in organizational development. My team and I have worked behind the scenes of multiple 7-figure agencies and have coached and consulted with over 150 agency owners. All this to say, when you join us on the Small But Mighty Agency podcast, you get real-world experience and practical tips that help you work less, earn more, and lead with integrity. So let's go. Hey friends, welcome back to the Small But Mighty Agency podcast, where we explore ideas, strategies, and leadership skills to help agencies thrive. Today, we're diving into a key part of leadership. It's all about clear goals, measurable results, and the art of setting team expectations. Joining me is Kendra Johnson, a leadership development expert and founder of the Venned Group. She has 10 years of experience in hospitality, tourism, and events. Kendra is passionate about helping senior leaders develop their mid-level talent. In today's episode, Kendra shares her insights on setting clear, measurable goals, managing expectations effectively, and creating a culture where every team member thrives. So whether you're leading a team or refining your leadership approach, this conversation will give you practical tools to inspire and empower your team. So let's get right into it. Kendra, it's so good to have you with us.
Thank you so much, Audrey. I'm so excited to be here and to chat about a topic that is one of my favorites to really dive into.
Kendra, let's start off with why is it important to set clear expectations for teams and how does it impact their performance?
There are 3 key reasons why you want to set expectations. The first is that it creates a consistent experience for your clients. The next is the team members that you have know what growth looks like. And this is a really important one, especially because we know that a lot of our team members are looking for fulfillment and also for growth within an organization. So having clear expectations of what their current roles look like and what future roles could look like helps them carve out that path to say, here's where I am and here's where I know I can get to. Which also creates loyalty within your organization, and people want to stay if they know that they have career trajectory. And then finally, it gives your leaders who are potentially newer leaders or not so seasoned in providing feedback, it gives them benchmarks and also just objective criteria that they can fall back on. So rather than having a performance conversation that is rooted in opinion or feels too personal, they can fall back on the expectations that you as an organization have given them to measure their team's performance, which makes those conversations flow a lot smoother.
Thank you for sharing the reasons why we need to set clear expectations. The next question that comes to mind is, how do you determine what expectations are realistic and achievable for a team?
This is the funny part, and it seems a little counterintuitive. And I've worked with many teams where the leaders or the founders say, well, the expectations have to come from me, right? And I always say, not always. Of course, you have an idea in mind, you have expectations in mind. But the thing that our founders need to keep in mind is that you're seasoned. You've been doing this for so long, and you can probably do it much quicker than a number of your team members, and especially those who are taking your vision and then sharing it out as a strategy and delegating it out. So we have an idea of what a realistic expectation and timeline looks like, that doesn't always align with the capacity or the competence of our team. So the best way to align on that and to set the expectations is to have an idea in mind, but then open the floor to your team. Specifically, if you have mid-level leaders, go to them and say, you've done this a couple of times, whatever that task is or whatever, that process is that you're looking to set expectations around, and ask them if that timeline or deadline is realistic for them. They know best how long things take. And if they're reporting to multiple people, that capacity could be, more full than you realize, and they might be a little stretched thin. So open the floor up, have that two-way dialogue, and set those expectations together. That also gives them the ownership over those deadlines, over those expectations, because they've co-created it, rather than I'm doing this because I was told so.
That word co-create is so important. We spend so much time thinking that we have to tell people what to do. And when we do, there is no buy-in. But when we co-create something and give people a choice and a voice, they are more likely to buy into the deadline or the to-dos or whatever is in front of them. And so I'm so glad that you brought that up, this power of really thinking of leadership as co-working with the people on your team to determine those expectations. Now,
yes.
Expectations and benchmarks. What are the difference between those two?
Expectations are the things that we want consistency with. So the expectations that we have are the behaviors that we consistently expect from our team members. Benchmarks are the check-ins, they're the goals, they're what we're striving for. And expectations can also have key metrics, but I normally like to reserve those more for the behaviors, whereas benchmarks are what those behaviors are bringing us towards and what they're guiding us to. So if you think of the benchmark being the big goal or even smaller goals, right? But with a number or a performance indicator attached to it, and then the expectations are the small little bits that we do every single day that allow us to get to those benchmarks.
I just want to repeat that because I think it's really important for people to hear it again. Expectations are what you expect of people on the day-to-day, right? Whereas the benchmarks are more like goals and milestones that the team needs to achieve. Now, when we think of benchmarks, the biggest question from agency owners is, how do we establish benchmarks that are both ambitious and attainable?
This is where data is our best friend. As agency owners, you collect data every single day. So you should have a pulse on what you're looking to measure, what makes campaigns successful, what makes what brings your clients success, right? So externally, between yourself and your clients, you have those benchmarks already. Internally, you should be looking to say, how do we ensure that we're retaining our clients year after year, month after month, if you're on retainer? How are we looking at the performance of the company overall? And what are our goals that we're striving for? I think looking at the year in review, of course, looking at the month in review, looking at the week in review helps us look forward to set those benchmarks and improve and increase based on our projections. And then also, of course, looking at industry standards. I think that's also important to say, to keep an eye on competition. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but it's also healthy to show where you're performing in relation to the rest of the industry. And it doesn't mean that you're comparing yourself in a negative way, but you're looking to say, yes, we're among the top agencies in the city, or here's where we need to get to be in the top of agencies in the city. So looking at data in the past in order to predict moving forward. And obviously you want your goals to increase year after year. So adding a little bit, then looking at industry standards and averages. And then I would also come back to and just reinforce talking to your team members. What are the goals and what are the benchmarks that they'd also like to see? Because we have a lot of, especially in agencies, a ton of creatives with a lot of fantastic ideas. And so by looking at where you've given your time and your energy in the past year, and maybe what initiatives you can start to roll out that increases your agency's revenue overall, talk to your team members, because they'll have a pulse on what some of those new great ideas could be, or ways you can iterate on past processes to expand your capacity and increase those benchmarks year over year.
It's really important, of course, to lean on the data itself to figure out what those benchmarks should be. But it shouldn't be without having communication with your team, because they are on the ground every day doing the things, and they have a line of sight that you might not have, or even the data might not have.
Yes, exactly. And so you need to have a mix of qualitative and the quantitative, of course, but the qualitative comes from getting a pulse, checking in with your team, and that shouldn't be once a year. That, right before you get into your strategy session, that should be checking month after month with your specific department. Look at a week in review so you can look at the week moving forward. I know in agencies there are a lot of moving parts. You want to make sure you can iterate and pivot quickly if you need to, so that you can get closer to those benchmarks rather than going completely off in the wrong direction.
One of the most powerful skills of any leader is communicating and knowing when to ask the right questions and where to be absolutely transparent. When it comes to communication, what do you think it should look like with a team when you are trying to manage expectations and benchmarks?
Yes. Oh, Audrey, you asked one of my favorite questions. Feedback is really important. And what I found, especially for a lot of newer leaders, they dread the word. They don't like providing feedback. But what we need to also remember is that we can set and manage and communicate, and I want to say reinforce expectations, also through positive feedback and, the acknowledgement of when expectations are met, the praise when expectations have been exceeded, and then obviously the one that people don't love as much, which is the constructive feedback. Mm-hmm. And so the first thing I always tell any leader to do when they are examining their relationship with feedback is to look at the way that you like to receive feedback. Because chances are, or your relationship with feedback, let's call it, chances are if you're hesitant and reluctant to receive feedback, then you're going to likely be reluctant to provide feedback, because we normally think everybody thinks the way we do. If you love feedback and you want to provide it all the time, you might actually be bulldozing or inundating somebody with feedback who needs a little bit of time and space to process feedback or isn't as comfortable with it. So that's the first thing, is assess your own relationship with feedback. And then we train on providing feedback with a very specific framework called DUST. And the idea behind DUST is that it's an analogy of being on the top of a mountain and being in a snowstorm. And when you're in a snowstorm, you can't see where you're going, you don't know your path forward, and you don't know which direction to go. When you have a light dusting of snow, you can see footprints from where you've come from. You can see clearly the sign where you need to go, but there's a light dusting so that you can kind of get your bearings. The same should be done with feedback. Feedback should be dusted throughout the year rather than just a dumping, once a quarter or once a year. It's hard for people to process that, and then they don't really know what to prioritize or what to take action on. So that's the first piece of dust. And then the second is that your feedback should be direct, it should be useful, it should be specific, and it should be timely. And if it's those four things and you just take a beat to go through and to organize your thoughts before you provide feedback, you will have a much better relationship with feedback itself and also with your team members.
Can you give us an example where you've worked with a leader and they've had to work on the feedback they give to their team member? Walk us through what that looked like. What areas did you have to work on with them, and what did they really need to get a good grasp of in order to be more effective as a leader who gives good feedback?
One that I think ties most closely to the analogy that I just gave is I was working with one founder, and she liked to gather feedback. So the good, the bad, and the ugly. And she would put it into a list, and she would sit down with her managers. I think it was bi-weekly they had their meetings, and she would go through the entire list. Here's what needs to be improved upon. Here's, we need to do better here. We need to do more of this. So we sat down and dissected it. And I said, first of all, as humans, we remember 50% of what we hear in any given conversation. So the chances are that when you're sitting down with your managers, they're also looking to impress you. Stress and nerves are high, which reduces our capacity to take in information in addition to, not being able to fully digest everything we're hearing. So at least 75% of your list is not actually registering with them. So let's take a step back and make sure that when you notice that something's happened and you need to provide feedback on it, you're making it timely. You're tying it to the action, as close to the action as you possibly can, and taking that individual to the side and having a conversation so it's fresh in their mind too. That was the first thing we worked on. The second was that she was using words like, we need to do better at this, or I need to see an improvement here, or I need to see more of this thing, right? I need to see more initiative. I need to see more communication. And what was actually happening was her managers were, yes, taking that, but their definition of more was different. So there wasn't any specificity and no metrics to track what more looked like or what better looked like. So we got her to be crystal clear on, what do you actually expect of them and how will you know that they're successful? Give me solid examples, give me numbers, give me behaviors. And then that's how you can track whether they've taken that information and they've changed their behaviors. And when she did that, she saw a complete 180 with her management team. And so much so that the folks that these managers were actually managing made comments of like, wow, you're actually so direct. And I've never had direction from you like this. Now I know exactly what you want. And that was the trickle down effect. So it was pretty cool to see that change.
The first thing is the timeliness of it and being able to address it when it happens. People are most effective when they can still see themselves in the situation and reflect right away. When we gather things up for that end of the month feedback, what happens is people need to zoom back to the instance that you're talking about, and it's hard for them to live that instance and learn from it, right? So I think, this idea of being timely is so important because then people can actually do their own reflection, and it's in doing your own reflection, that's how we learn, right? And the other element that you just talked about here is clarity and being specific about what that change looks like. I'm sure you hear this as well too from leaders, Kendra. Leaders often say, I wish my managers, my team members could read my mind. I'm sure you hear that. And I think and I think what you're speaking to is, they can't read your mind. And the only way they could read your mind is if you are direct about what you expect from that feedback. And I think you've clarified that really well, helping people understand what being direct looks like and how being direct doesn't mean that you have to be mean. It doesn't mean that you have to be bossy. It just means that you are very clearly stating expectations. So I love that you've identified those two clear examples for us. Now, you talked a bit about engaging the team in providing feedback on the expectations. So basically, when you're setting expectations and benchmarks, it's about communicating and getting that team feedback. How do you ensure that the team feels involved in these processes of setting benchmarks and expectations?
I mean, shared documentation is key, right? Having a document that is that's visual that people can go back and reference hits all of our learning styles as well. So to have just a verbal meeting where there isn't actually any visual takeaway means that things can get lost in translation. We might not always be on the same page, and people walk away with different meanings of what you've discussed. So whether that's an AI summary of what you talked about that's sent out to the team, whether that's a graph that we check in on and we look at consistently to track our progress, anything that really just allows people to come back to it and say, okay, yeah, that's exactly what I thought we were talking about, or I totally missed the mark and I need more clarification. So bringing them into the loop. And the one caveat that I do want to add there is that we don't want everybody's opinion, right? Or everybody's opinion on setting these expectations. And so I see a lot of leaders say, well, I need to talk to my entire team. And there's a time and place for that. But when you're setting expectations, I would say have first and foremost and co-create, to use the term that you highlighted earlier, co-create with the people who will be managing those expectations and reiterating those expectations. And then have them have conversations with their team members as well, if necessary. But these folks have presumably moved up through the ranks. They understand what it meant to be an individual contributor and now to be in a leadership role. So they should be close enough to understand the day-to-day. If they're not, that's also maybe something that you want to dig into a little bit more. But don't invite everybody into the conversation because that can also muddy the expectations and the clarity. Speak with the people who are managing those expectations. get them involved. And that also creates a sense of, I don't want to say exclusivity, because I know that that's kind of looked down upon, but it
Ownership,
creates, yeah, it's
right?
that
Ownership.
accountability, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I really connect with this idea of making sure the conversations for growth are tracked. It's easy to come on the call, coach the team member, and give them some feedback, and you click the off button if you're on Zoom or whatnot, and off you go. But the reality is, in the agency world, when someone is super busy and have a ton of things on the plate, once they click that button to end that call with you, they're going to forget because they've got other things on their agenda. And so something as simple as making sure that they get the Coles notes or the crib notes or whatever you want to call them after that meeting is so important to the next conversation where you can reflect back on what was discussed. The other thing is not involving everyone in certain conversations. When you are helping someone get clear on the expectations, 100% that it should be a conversation between two people, a one-to-one conversation. What are your suggestions if a leader is having a conversation with a manager and sharing how this manager can then set expectations with their team? Does the leader come in to that conversation, or do they just kind of leave it to the team member to own and go from there?
I hate this answer, but I will say it depends. And the reason I say it depends is because we need to have trust that that team member can set those expectations and has a track record of setting expectations. And then also a clear understanding of their competence and their knowledge within whatever we're looking to, how we're creating those benchmarks, right? The knowledge of whatever that is. I think that if it is a team that is quite close and doesn't have a lot of distance between management levels, then it's a great opportunity for that new manager or that mid-level manager to take ownership over something. Um, One of the ways that I would suggest testing out that trust, if it's a trial run and you've never done this before, is having an initial meeting and saying, here's what I think we should do and how I think we should set these expectations. In order for us to have this make sense for your department, what I'd like you to do is take this away and have a conversation with your team. So coach them on how to have a conversation with their team and mine some of that information. And then in that meeting, set the follow-up meeting. So, within 2 weeks, you need to have this conversation. You need to collect information from your department or your team, and then come back and we'll realign and formalize those expectations. So I think as agency senior leaders, you have so much going on. It's redundant for you to be in those conversations. Your time can be better spent doing other things. So when you can coach those leaders on how to have the conversation with their team, bring it back to you, basically like consult you and then or inform you depending on where they are in terms of their leadership journey. And then you formalize it and make it concrete together. That allows you to have the trust, to have the clarity and the understanding of what they've communicated with their team.
If you're a leader, you want visibility in how your manager
Exactly.
is going to go to the direct reports. And so just that visibility of how they're going to do it in a sign off moment allows you as a leader not to have to jump into every single conversation. Now, I want to talk a bit about motivation here, because anytime we talk about expectations and benchmarks and all those things, the question is, well, in order for people to exceed expectations and meet benchmarks, they got to be motivated. So what strategies do you see effective in keeping team members motivated?
Yes. Oh my gosh. I mean, it's funny because it sounds so simple, but my first strategy is find out why people are there. Have the conversation. What do you love about this industry? What do you love about our agency? What gets you out of bed in the morning to come to work? And you can have those conversations more informally as well, right? You can understand why somebody's there, and you can even see in the work that they do what really lights them up, and then dig into that and ask questions. I really noticed that you loved SEO work and you were really involved. Is that something that motivates you every single day? Do you want to learn more about that? Or how does that make you feel? And what are the benchmarks of success for you in your role? So again, putting it back on them and watching for and observing what brings those people joy and what they talk about most.
Motivation isn't one size fits all, right?
No.
And understanding that motivation isn't a one size fits all is really important to help our team members succeed. Let's talk about common mistakes that leaders make when setting expectations for their team? Is there any other major red flags that come up often?
Oh, yes. Yes. Two things really stand out to me. So people need to feel secure in their workplace. And we dive into more than just psychological safety, but there are actual components that motivate people to show up every single day. They need praise, so long as praise is done appropriately and not, you know, we're not overpraising because that devalues the praise. They need to feel acknowledged, like their contributions matter and they're actually doing something meaningful. They fit in a meaningful way rather than just showing up, punching the clock, and leaving. There needs to be respect. So, alignment, they need to understand what the culture is and have alignment with that. And then finally, their knowledge. They want to grow. They want to understand how they grow. They want to be able to share their knowledge and share their expertise and contribute, again, in a meaningful way. So a lot of the times we notice with teams that in one of those, let's call it 5 pillars, something's missing. And that's where friction is presented. So we need to make sure that we're keeping a pulse on each of those, and holistically as an organization or as an agency, we're taking care and being mindful of how we're demonstrating culture within those 5 pillars. The other piece, and this is one of the biggest issues on a micro scale that I notice with leaders setting expectations and communicating expectations, is that they forget when the benchmark moves, you need to communicate about it. A lot of the time we see whether roles and responsibilities have been added or somebody's gone above and beyond consistently, and now we expect more from them, but they don't actually know that, and they're operating at their former capacity or former level, and we're disappointed in them, and they're disappointed because they're no longer getting the praise. When we notice that somebody's exceeded our expectations and we've set new expectations for them, we need to communicate that. A lot of the time we keep them in our minds and we just think we've communicated them through praise, but that doesn't mean that that benchmark has moved for that individual. So just keeping in mind that that conversation needs to happen consistently. And you also need to recognize when your expectations have shifted and it's written down on a piece of paper or it's living rent free in your head and it hasn't actually come out verbally yet.
Yeah. There's a saying in leadership, and that is over communicate. Now, I don't lean into that belief that over communicating is the way to go. I believe that knowing when to communicate is really the way to go. What are your thoughts on that?
I completely agree with you. I think that over communication brings the blizzard of information, right? It doesn't provide any clarity. If anything, people need to sift through what's relevant and what isn't. So that's again why I make sure that it's direct, it's useful information. Does it relate specifically to their job, to their role? If not, don't share it. Is it specific? Can they measure against it? And then obviously, is it timely? I think that over communication does bring about problems when people take it too literally, but effective communication is the sweet spot.
That's such a key takeaway. Kendra, before we wrap up, tell us about your journey.
I've worked actually in a number of different industries. I was making commercials as a production assistant through university. I've worked in corporate hospitality and in event planning and project management. So I've really kind of spanned the gambit of industries. And my passion really lay in working and dealing with people, whether that was clients, whether that was my team. And I found that and really solidified that in the event space. But what I didn't realize was that in loving people so much and wanting to impress and do a good job, that also came at a cost of my personal health, sanity, bank account, so I'm a recovering people pleaser, I guess you could say. And in my journey and moving up through leadership, I would safeguard my team, but that meant I was not being mindful of my own resources. So I experienced severe burnout and I left that industry, left the organization and moved to San Diego and then to Norway and took a little bit of a sabbatical and, traveled through 40 countries in the process, which was again, just reinforcing my love for people and how we actually form connection with other individuals. And in this process, I recognized the need for soft skills in leadership and just soft skills in connecting with folks, whether that's your team members or your clients. So in 2018, the Venned Group was born under a different name, but I launched our first program, which is the Spark program, and started running workshops on how to develop these soft skills, how to connect, how to communicate, and how to really drive commitment. So it's been a really fulfilling journey, despite the highs and lows.
Thanks for sharing your story, Kendra. Where can people find you?
They can find me a number of different places. The easiest and probably best to connect would be on LinkedIn. I do love supporting others on LinkedIn as well. So through LinkedIn, through our website, venndgroup.com. We are on Instagram, although I have to say I am new to the whole social platform and business posting, so getting better, but feel free to find me there. I would say email as well, kendra@venndgroup.com. But no matter how you choose to reach out or connect, I'm always super happy to have a conversation, to grab coffees, and to get to know other leaders and hear what they're working with and what their teams are struggling with or really succeeding with as well.
Thank you so much, Kendra.
Thank you, Audrey. It's been a fantastic conversation.
Hey, thanks for hanging out with me at the Small But Mighty Agency podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, it would mean the world to me if you hit the follow or subscribe button in your podcast app and share it with a friend. I'll see you on the next one.